Welcome, and thank you so much for coming this evening. It means a great deal to me. I love talking about these topics, and it gives me great joy to share it with others. As Russ said, this evening I'm going to discuss Vatican II's Declaration on Religious Liberty and its connection to Pope Francis's Synod. Before doing that, I do want to address two other topics briefly. I've done a great deal of research for these presentations, and I'd like to take this opportunity to express my deep respect and gratitude to many of my fellow theologians from whom I have learned so much about Vatican II and the Synod. And I hope I do them justice in my attempt to share some of their insights. The second topic has to do with a concept developed by theologian John Henry Newman, St. John Henry Newman, whose works date back to the 1850s. I begin with Newman because one of the concepts that is central to this evening's discussion finds a home in a theological principle attributed to John Henry Newman. Vatican II is sometimes referred to as the Council of John Henry Newman. And once during a papal audience, Pope Paul VI referred to Vatican II as Newman's hour. There is no doubt that Vatican II upheld a number of controversial positions that Newman held during his own day, often at his own personal cost, because there were many during his time who were furious with some of Newman's theological ideas. But at Vatican II, Newman was vindicated. He began his theological career as a member of the Anglican Church, but in 1845, he converted to Catholicism. Not long after his conversion, he formally expressed his wish to become an Oratorian, a religious order founded by St. Philip Neri. Newman was committed to many theological issues, among them the dignity of the laity, the inviolability of conscience, and the freedom of theological investigation. One of his best-known essays, entitled On Consulting the Faithful in Matters of Doctrine, is often acknowledged as an anticipation of Vatican II. His thoughts on consulting the faithful found a home in the dogmatic constitution Lumen Gentium, and we can hope that his attention to the laity in matters of doctrine will also be seen in the results of the Synod. But for our purpose tonight, we will focus on Newman's teaching on the development of doctrine. Before Vatican II, the Church had prided itself on its immutability, on the unchanging nature of its teachings. But a major shift occurred at Vatican II, a move from a classicist worldview to a historically conscious worldview. The traditional view maintained the truth of the past as certain and unchangeable for every future time and culture, whereas the post-Vatican II view maintains that every expression of a theological truth is the product of a time period in which it was expressed. This does not mean that the basic truths of the faith change. Rather, it means that believers come to deeper insights into these truths and how they are illuminated by contemporary conditions. Pope John XXIII himself espoused this new worldview in his opening speech at Vatican II, saying, "The ancient deposit of the faith is one thing, and the way it is expressed in every generation is another." Implied here is that every new age presents new data, new questions, new discoveries that theologians must think about when they seek to give reasons for the hope that is in them. This shift is critical not only for our discussions of religious freedom, but also for the Synod. As I said last week, something new is being born, and our task in birthing this new reality of church will be to preserve the fire and not to worship the ashes of the past. In this regard, Newman believed that a valid test of doctrine was not about immutability, but about life and growth. He believed that the church was an entity in the process of development, that it unfolds through history, and that doctrine does develop as the Holy Spirit assists the church to grasp the truth that is implicit in the gospel. By the end of the 19th century, this concept of the development of doctrine, so central to Newman's theology, was widely accepted in the Catholic Church. In the decades preceding the council, there was this group of theologians, I believe I've referred to them before, but I like to call them the Prophet Theologians, who were actually paving the way for the theology that would be born at Vatican II. These theologians, like Newman, knew that there were some elements of the faith that belonged to the very essence of the faith and would endure always. For example, the Trinity. But they also knew that there were other elements that could change as the church moved through history. One example of such a change is the move from the Pre-Vatican II pyramid model of church to the communion model of church after the council, which was a rediscovery of the church's first ecclesiology found in the New Testament. And again, Newman's position found a home in Lumen Gentium. In the very first article, we find a remarkable statement. Quote, "The church desires now to unfold more fully to the faithful of the church and to the whole world its own inner nature," end quote. This statement is truly remarkable given the church's attitude toward change in the decades before the council. This unfolding is inherent in the divine plan, and so we need not fear it. Theologian Karl Rahner, one of the experts at the council, believed that God as absolute future was the key to the church's future. Clearly, what we find in Lumen Gentium is a dynamic understanding of church. Thus, it is characteristic of Catholic doctrine to also unfold itself ever more fully as we move through history. The truths of Revelation do not change, but what does change is the way humans understand and express these truths in a given time period. Before Vatican II, Catholic theology became locked in a system of timeless truths, but more and more theologians were becoming dissatisfied with this perception. Like Newman, they were becoming convinced that Catholicism must be defended by reason, not by force. There is one additional element of Newman's theology that warrants our attention before continuing. Last week, we laid the groundwork for the role of the laity in the Synod. We talked about the Sensus Fidelium. Newman's position, though very controversial in his day, would finally be accepted at Vatican II. During his lifetime, he was troubled with the failure of church leaders who did not appreciate the genuine role of the layperson in the church. In Newman's day, it was not common for laypersons to become professional theologians, but he did maintain that believers should receive a solid religious education, claiming, quote, "I want a laity, not arrogant, not rash in speech, but men and women who know their religion, who enter into it, who know just where they stand, who know their creed so well that they can give an account of it, who know so much of history that they can defend it. I think contemporary religious educators would heartily endorse these words of Newman. As we move into our examination of the Declaration of Religious Liberty, I hope you will soon recognize the significance of Newman's theology as a foundation, not only for this document, but also for the Synod. Theologian Edward Hennenberg has written an excellent book on Vatican II, a concise guide to the documents of Vatican II. In it, he goes through each of the 16 documents and highlights in a succinct manner the key points we need to know about each of the documents. He claims that Dignitatis Humanae was the most bitterly contested document of Vatican II because it raised a question that ran beneath all of the council's discussions. How much was the church willing to change? When I was teaching my course on Vatican II to undergraduates, they were totally surprised that there would be any controversy over the topic of religious freedom. In their minds, so many years after the council, of course, everyone should have the right to worship as they choose. But for some bishops, it posed a very serious problem because for much of the church's history, the Catholic Church had condemned the right to religious freedom. After the Enlightenment period in the 18th century, with its praise of human reason as the ultimate source of truth, the Catholic Church became extremely defensive. All of the church's official teachings were in keeping with a theology that maintained there was no salvation outside the Catholic Church. This defensive mentality is clearly expressed in Pope Pius IX's 1864 document, the Syllabus of Errors, in which he condemned 80 positions he believed represented modern errors. Among the so-called errors condemned by Pius IX was freedom of religion, separation of church and state, and the claim that the Pope should come to terms with progress, liberalism, and modern civilization. He also affirmed his predecessor, Pope Gregory XVI's condemnation of liberty of conscience. Right up until Vatican II, the Church's position was this: since Catholics possess the truth, only they have the right to proclaim the faith. Other Christian churches and other religions are excluded because they are false. This position led to the mantra, error has no rights. I have mentioned the Prophet Theologians who were paving the way for Vatican II. An American Jesuit, John Courtney Murray, was one of these theologians. And like the others working during his time, Murray too had been disciplined and silenced by the official church. But at the council, Murray's position on religious liberty gradually took hold. He claimed, quote, "Of course error has no right. Then again, neither does truth, since both of these are abstract concepts," end quote. Therefore, only human beings have rights. By shifting the debate to the nature of the dignity of the human person, Murray made possible a new approach to religious liberty. Many of the bishops at Vatican II wanted to support the idea of religious freedom, but the issue of doctrinal development troubled them. How could they endorse this principle of religious liberty when it had been condemned by past popes? Their concern was clearly articulated by French Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre when he stated, quote, "If what is being taught now is true, then what the church has taught is false," end quote. A number of bishops were not ready or sufficiently theologically informed to admit that some church teachings could change. The document begins by affirming the basic dignity of the human person and the importance of human freedom. Article 10 of the document tells us that people cannot be forced to practice a particular religion. Truth has its own power of gentle persuasion. The document acknowledges that in taking this position, it is developing the doctrine, and it emphasizes continuity with Scripture. After all, Jesus did not use coercion. He issued an invitation, but left his listeners free to make their own choice. The acknowledgement that people must follow their consciences in religious matters represents a profound growth with many possibilities for future development, including our interest in the Synod. I am reminded of the Enlightenment philosopher Denis Diderot, who claimed that coercion of faith does not work because it will make a strong person a martyr and a weak person a liar. It should be noted that Vatican II's affirmation of religious freedom does not imply that all religions are the same, but it does teach that the teachings of the Catholic faith of the Catholic Church are true, but it recognizes that truth cannot be forced. The text also makes clear that this document is developing the teaching of recent popes, and that on this issue, the teaching has changed. Anyone familiar with pre-Vatican II theology understands how truly stunning this development was. Another concern shared by a number of bishops at the council, and a valid one, is that freedom might be understood as license. But a careful reading of the document reflects that it does not encourage license, but rather responsibility. Article 8 of Dignitatis Humanae encourages the responsible use of freedom. It sees true freedom in people who are oriented toward what is true and just. It did formally acknowledge development in the Church's teaching on religious liberty, but it never explained how doctrinal development is to be understood. Hannenberg offers what I believe is a very helpful explanation. If revelation itself is not primarily about God, but rather a living encounter with God, then we can admit that our limited human words often fail to capture the mystery of God. In such a view, doctrinal development can be viewed as our becoming more and more conscious of all that is revealed in Scripture. And as the quote on the page says, what is present implicitly from the beginning in the gospel gradually becomes explicit in the church as we grow in our relationship with God. Every final exam I would give in my Vatican II course had that comment on it for the students to explain. That's how important it was. In our discussion of this document, you may have noticed that thus far, the topic of religious freedom was examined primarily in light of its relationship to the state and other religions. The document did not address religious liberty within the church. And yet, many of the debates that have emerged since Vatican II revolve around this very question. Edward Hannenberg addresses this point, and it is this discussion that holds the most interest for our study of the Synod. For example, how free are Catholics to voice their questions to the hierarchy? What forums are available for this kind of questioning? How can we live out our convictions as Catholics when our convictions may not conform to church teaching? Are Catholics sufficiently aware of the fact that church teaching can grow and develop? In an article by Massimo Fagioli entitled A Postscript to Dignitatis Humanae, Fagioli writes about a document recently issued by the International Theological Commission, which addresses a problem that Vatican II did not anticipate. Quote, "It is no longer a question of applying religious freedom only in respect to the religion of others, but also to the criticism of one's own religion," end quote. Needless to say, this is extremely important for our discussion of the Synod. Vatican II formally sanctioned the validity of the development of doctrine, and this was of great importance. The validity of Newman's theory on doctrinal development represents a profound growth with many possibilities for further development, specifically the issue of religious freedom within one's own faith. This is just one of the reasons Francis's Synod is so important for the church today. I am so grateful to FutureChurch for providing these sessions on Vatican II and Synodality, because in so many articles I have read, the authors focus on Vatican II as the starting point to understand Synodality. Last week I quoted Massimo Fagioli. It bears repeating. Francis is appealing to Vatican II to open the way for a synodal church. It was not quite born at Vatican II, but was theologically conceived there. In the same vein, theologian Hofmann Hospino has said that to understand synodality, we must return to the text and spirit of Vatican II. Hospino then raises a genuine concern, saying the following: "It is my observation that in many seminaries and faculties of theology today, the documents of Vatican II receive little attention. How then can pastoral leaders and theologians then understand synodality?" I use this quote not to depress you, but to commend FutureChurch for understanding the intimate relationship between Vatican II and synodality. When Ospino was asked for his recommendation for ways to understand and appreciate conversations on synodality, he said, "First of all, humility and openness to listen. We need to overcome the fears and prejudices." He continues, "Read more, starting with a more in-depth study of the documents of the Second Vatican Council. The Synod, the experience of walking together, is rooted in the spirit of Vatican II. Pope Francis has called upon us to embrace this approach," end quote. As an aside, if any of you have tried to read the documents, you know they're hard to read. They're written with a lot of church language. That's why I would often, my church, in my Vatican II course, I would have them read a commentary on the documents, such as Hannenberg's book, that would outline what to look for when they would go to read a document, because the documents themselves are difficult to read. The document we examined this evening opens the door for each of us to recognize the incredible freedom we do have. We have it through our inherent dignity as human persons, but also by virtue of our call as baptized persons. As stated last week, synodality retrieves a more dynamic and inclusive model of being and acting ecclesially. In the first millennium of the Christian tradition, there were many practices from which we can learn a great deal from. Saint Cyprian, a bishop in the 2nd century, is a perfect example. He told his community, "Do nothing without the consensus of the people." Unfortunately, during the 2nd millennium, after the Council of Trent in the 16th century, the attention shifted to uniformity and institutionalization. As it unfolds, the synodal model today seeks to achieve some sensus ecclesiae, meaning to feel with the entire church. And Francis continues to emphasize that the changes must come from the grassroots, from the local churches. I want to make a clarification about the term local church. I think many people would hear the term and think, well, the local church is my parish. And that you would be right. It is one form of the local church, but there is a broader form of the local church as well. For example, the local church of North America, the local church of Asia, the local church of Africa. Those are local churches to be kept in mind as well. And Francis has those in mind when he speaks of local church. The first level in the exercise of synodal discernment is listening to the local churches and how the faith is being expressed in different cultures and contexts. I have received a number of emails from participants of the first session, and I welcome them. They were wonderful. One woman said she saw 2 different surveys on the synod, and she didn't understand that. And I didn't see that, I wasn't sure. My guess is that one survey may have been from one diocese, another survey may have been from her local church or a different diocese. And so there's not one size fits all. What those surveys are trying to do is look into the grassroots of their community. This is what Francis is asking us to do. Another point made by Ospino is that the synodal way challenges monoculturalism, this one size fits all, that one culture, is the culture of the world. Before Vatican II, we believed that uniformity equaled unity, but that is not true. And it is definitely not what Francis is calling for. He wants us to know that each local church must foster an incarnated experience of church. That is why it is possible to have ministries that respond to the local needs of a culture, let's say like the Amazon region, that are not necessarily ministries needed in North America. This is what theologian Karl Rahner meant when he said that at Vatican II, we finally became a world church. By that, he did not mean that we had Catholic churches all over the world. We already had that before Vatican II. But at that time, the church existed as a kind of export firm, exporting European Christianity to the rest of the world. So, for example, if you went to Sunday Mass in London or Africa or Jamaica or Japan or Brooklyn, you would think you were in Rome. It was the exact same Mass, one size fit all. But Vatican II opened the door to a true world church, one that does not export a finished product, a Eurocentric theology of church, but one that engages other people, other cultures, and other mentalities. Religious freedom is needed for this to occur. This is precisely how Francis understands the Synod. and why it must begin at the local level with the people of God, with their concerns and with their questions. The local church expresses the church's universality in terms of what it believes, but it affirms its diversity in terms of how that faith is enculturated in different ecclesial forms and practices. Francis does not want Rome to impose a homogeneous church model. The church is a church of churches. This is the conviction that drives the process of the Synod. The Synod starts with the local churches until the final Synod's assembly will be celebrated in Rome in 2023. That meeting will be the convergence of all local churches and the expression of unity with the Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis. On this point, Jesuit Father George Wilson wrote an article entitled Stage 1 of the Synod, Listening to the Faithful. He repeats a line we have all heard. A good leader's task is not to teach, but to listen. He says that in church language, that is called consulting the faithful. Somewhere John Henry Newman must be smiling. Wilson offers his definition of a synod. Quote, a wisdom-seeking effort undertaken by the people of God under the guidance of the Spirit of Jesus at a particular era in its engagement with its surrounding society, end quote. A synod embraces persons from different states of life, but they are all there by virtue of their baptism. Baptism is the only ticket of admission. The goal of the synod is wisdom. It is to discover the way the Lord is calling the church to act. And the participants must have the freedom to express their thoughts, their concerns, their questions, and yes, their criticisms. An essential component in the search for wisdom is to be open to prophecy, not the ability to foretell the future, but to name reality. A single individual or a small group may sense powerful currents at work far below the mainstream. Hopefully, our discussion of Dignitatis Humanae has demonstrated that any one of us has the freedom to name the realities our church needs to hear at this time and provides us with the courage to perhaps be that prophetic voice in our community. To hold a synod for a community composed of a great variety of cultures, facing different perils and aspiring to unimaginably diverse outcomes is to undertake an enormous task. It is only the Holy Spirit that can make it happen. When theologian Yves Congar, also an expert at the council, first heard of John the 23rd's decision to convene a church council, he remarked, quote, this could make sense only in faith. If it has been done without reflection, then what a catastrophe. Or it is the work of the Holy Spirit, in which case everything is possible. Francis believes that same spirit is with us on our synod journey. We conclude with a quote from another great leading voice at Vatican II, Cardinal Leo Sunens, quote, the history of Christianity is for us a school of humility. This same history is also a school of hope. Thank you. Now, if you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Thank you, Sister Maureen. I feel so inspired by your presentation tonight, and so feel so hopeful. So for those who have questions, you can use that little reaction button that you hold your hand up. And if you can't find that, you can actually hold your hand up and I will look for you. But if you use the button, you come to the top of my list, and it's easy to find those who have questions. So, so go ahead and use that. And I don't know if Mary Ann, if you have
Yes.
a question. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Actually, I don't have a question, but I'm from Victoria, British Columbia, and we just lost the last living bishop from Vatican II. He was the Bishop of Vancouver Island for many, many years. He was 97 and he just died last week. And Patrick Jameson, who's here, just wants to say a few words to let you know about Bishop Ramey.
Remy DeRue, yes, I read the article.
Yeah, Bishop Ramey held a synod from 1986 to 95 when it was officially declared a synodal diocese. And I took part in all that. I started a newspaper at that time just to help him with it. And so that model of synodality echoes exactly what we've just heard. And it's an amazing experience to go through, but it takes time and it has to be in depth, and it involves a lot of what you're doing, adult education. So I'm very prepared to provide documents around some of that when the time comes. There was a book, it's called The People's Synod. So it was very prophetic. Ramey was a prophetic figure. And so this whole process has now been vindicated by the Vatican II Pope. And you may know that there was a Canadian Jesuit appointed as a cardinal by Francis named Michael Cherney, and he's coming to Bishop Ramey's funeral on Saturday. So I see that as a good sign of this sort of continuity. I'm also involved with a Zoom group that has already done the synod process. So it's very exciting. And I just wanted to make it those few points.
Well, I'm glad that you did, because many of us here have not been involved in a synod in our lifetime. And so your insights have been extremely helpful. I mean, to hear that you were enthused and excited and almost transformed as a result of it. And Remy
DeRue.
Ramey DeRue.
Yeah, I just finished reading an article about him. I was, and I posted something on Facebook about him. I was just touched by his vision. I mean, he was a man ahead of his time.
Way
in
ahead.
terms of reaching out to the vulnerable and the care that he had. So yeah, I'm going to take a look at that book. Who wrote the book, The People's Synod?
It was a woman named Pearl Gervais who is coordinating all the funeral arrangements, Pearl Gervais. It's under the name of Grant Maxwell. He was the main editor. And basically it consists of all the reflections by the people who attended the synod. And it's very creative. There was an arts festival, which seemed to be the highlight of the whole process over years. I've written a few books on Bishop DeRue. You'd be certainly entitled to have those. He was appointed at age 38 in 1962. So he didn't have any, we might say, baggage from before. So that's why he was able to go so strong and so straightforward.
Yeah.
And he was seen as an international figure in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Catherine from Toronto, you have a question.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much, Sister, for these wonderful lectures. They're just fabulous. Can you remind me, please, of the name and maybe the email address of the person to whom we can send our synodal responses if we suspect our archdiocese isn't really going to represent them?
So Maureen, just so that everyone knows, I have actually posted that document up on the site where we have Maureen's notes and her PowerPoint. There's a document that says information. So I can post it again. I'll send it again, but there's a lot of good information and the address is in there. So,
On the FutureChurch website?
yeah, yeah, I'll send it all out again, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they do have an incredible amount of information on that website. Yeah.
So Rita, you have a question? I don't know how to say your last name, Cochlea? Rita?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
sorry. I was trying to find out how to unmute myself. Thank you,
Okay.
sister. This, I was taking notes. I even listened to you last week again, so I could take some notes because it's just so very interesting. The question I have is maybe a silly question. In our diocese, the bishop has not done anything about the Synod process. He says he's doing this renew for the diocese, and it's going to be included in that, but there's nothing for a call to bring people together into the different parishes so that we could speak about what our view for a future church would be. So what do you do? How do you act in that kind of a environment? How do you do this? How do you try to, get groups together if your diocese isn't providing any places to go? Or I'm just wondering how you go about things like that then.
I had two suggestions for you, Rita.
Thank you.
One would be creating your own group. If there's other people in your parish who are interested, or that would be one way of doing it. But there's another website, and I'm not sure which one it is, but it's on the FutureChurch website, where you can tell them your geographical area, and they can tell you where you can join a group that is developing thoughts on the synod to be submitted. Now, one of the things I read, and I was disappointed when I read it, but I understand why they wrote it. They did say, we are only accepting feedback that comes from a group or a parish or a diocese. Individuals writing on their own, unfortunately, they're not accepting those. And as I said, I sort of understand it, but it's also unfortunate because I just finished saying they could be bypassing the prophet, and that would be unfortunate, but that's their decision. But there is a website that does show you where you can find a geographical, if you tell them your geographical area, they can hook you up with a group that is functioning in your area.
Oh, thank you, sister. That's something I'll do. It's on FutureChurch then? It'll be on the website? Okay, sister, thank you so much. I
With the
appreciate
information that Deb and Russ have passed along.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sister.
And I just put it back into the chat room so you can see that document with all the addresses. And the USCCB and the Vatican both also say they prefer group or organization input, but they'll take individual input. So please send your thoughts there for sure.
Oh, okay. Thank
Yeah,
you so
yeah,
much. I
definitely,
appreciate it. Thank you.
definitely. So Mary Emick, you have a question?
I think she's muted.
I think you're muted yet, Mary. It's always hard once you get on, then all of a sudden you can't remember how to mute yourself and unmute.
That should be
It's
good.
good. Yeah.
Our question is kind of following up on some of the previous ones. We have gone to a listening session. It was very similar to what we got at a parish level a year and a half ago to review our church. And we got no feedback at all from that. So what I'm concerned with is, as we submit something, and we have been amassing a document for 2 years, we've been working on our response through the Holy Spirit for some time. At what can we expect from our parish and our church? What will they do with what we give them? I'm not clear with the process at
Yeah.
all.
I don't know what you'll be receiving from your parish, because individual parishes are way enthusiastic or not enthusiastic at all. But if I understand it correctly, a report is going to be compiled by the Secretariat for the Synod. And that is going to be published at the end of the 2023 Synod. And so there will be some sort of report issued at the end of 2023. He's muted. You're muted again.
You're muted again, yeah.
So there's nothing that will actually give me feedback that they processed what we put in.
Not that I know of.
And given that, isn't the real opportunity for us to, as a group and locally, share our response to our church as we know it, rather than relying on the hierarchy to take it?
Sure. Well, surely I would do both. I would certainly submit it to my local parish, so that if that's what you're asking, the local parish that that you attend, share with them the results of your meetings, but then submit it to Rome as well. So I would do both, definitely.
So just so you know a little bit in terms of how the process is going to work, in terms of this input that we are engaging in right now. So from here, and they've moved the date. At first it was
Right.
April was the cutoff date. Now it's August.
August.
And what's supposed to happen is that all this input from all of us from all over the world is supposed to be taken in by the Synod office. They will develop actually the working document that the bishops will use at the 2023 Synod. They'll be their starting point, which is supposedly this gathering. Now, of course, that isn't going to be the end of the discussion about what Catholics have said from all over the world, but that is supposedly the process. So if you haven't gotten feedback from your parish, I would say call them and say, when will we get feedback regarding our input, or your diocese, wherever you did it? I suggest that you definitely call them. So sorry about that. Okay, so I'll go on. Joe, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Hey, Maureen.
Hi, Joe.
How do we involve the people we should be hearing from? An example, all my nieces and nephews, they all went to Catholic school, Catholic high school, a couple of Catholic colleges. They are just not interested. They're not angry. They're just not interested.
Mm-hmm.
How do we involve them?
There's an
Because
article,
these are the people, and they're good people. They're involved in stuff.
but they are not educated about it. That's what's really infuriating me. There's an article by Massimo Fascioli, "Unexcused absence is not an option." I think it's in Commonweal, I'm not sure, but it's not too long ago. But his point is, in the 60s and 70s, there was real enthusiasm on the part of the young people, about, granted, it was also the 60s and 70s, and, they were enthused about everything. But it seemed to trickle down into the younger generation. This is not trickling down to them. And I just wrote an email to our Board of Trustees. There's a great article that I read today about how college campuses are, Ospino says that schools of theology and faculties are, give little attention to Vatican II. And as I wrote to someone, we have a Board of Trustees meeting in March, and I'm a member of the board. They're going to hear about the Synod when I'm there, that Mount St. Mary College should be doing something to educate our students. This is going to be their church if they want it, you know, and we have a vibrant campus ministry on campus. We have, it's a Catholic school. We have many Catholic students, but you know, what did Peter say in the New Testament to the eunuch, or what did the eunuch say? How will I know unless some man show me? You know, we have to show them, we have to teach them, we have to gather them. And you're right, I have nieces and nephews as well. Good people, good Catholics, but they've never even heard the word synod at all. So this to me is a real problem. This is a real gap in the process. And I don't know, maybe offering to give presentations, tying them up in a room and giving one of my presentations to them might work. You know, if I have to go stand on a corner somewhere, I will, but it's troubling me. And if it's troubling theologians like Hoffman Ospino, it's serious. And you raise a very important question. And I just, I don't know the answer to that question. How do we go about doing it? Sorry.
Thanks, Joe. That's the perennial question, isn't it? Everybody is dealing with. Marlene, you have a question?
Yes. My name is Maureen Millick. I'm in Pittsburgh. The U.S. Catholic Priests website has an excellent short program that I plan to use, and I'm inviting people in my apartment building. And I will be able then to report. But it's very simple. It gives you the ground rules that should be established. You know, you no cross talking, you know, no complaints, that kind of thing. And then it goes on to explain the responsibilities of the facilitator. And then it lists only 2 questions. And one is, what are your joys and sorrows in the church? And the other one is, what is your hope for the church to be? And then you are the note taker. And then you share these notes with the people to make sure that you have recorded their thoughts accurately. And it's just a very simple thing that I think I can use to my advantage. So if you go to their website, United States Catholic Priests Association, you'll be able to access that, I'm sure.
Thank you, Marlene.
Marlene, can you put the URL for that into the chat box?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Daryl, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to thank you all for doing this. It's informative and empowering both. The one thing that I participated in a session in my local parish, and I also went online and just answered questions that the Diocese of Washington, D.C. has. Since I lived there for 20 years, I said, what the heck? But, you know, I was impressed with the session we had locally at the parish. And there was some talk about using that information for even at the local level, regardless of what happens later. And I personally, I mean, I know that whatever our larger church will do will take decades, as we all know. But I've been under the hopeful idea that there could be some renewal even at a local parish level from this process. I mean, is that am I dreaming? Is that a pipe dream on my part?
No, because you see, it's what Francis says, start at the local level, the grassroots level. So your local parish is the grassroots level. And if that becomes more vibrant and alive and synodal, more power to you. And you don't have to wait for the larger church, you know, to encompass you. Do your thing and let that touch your lives in your local parish. And I commend you for caring enough to, as you said, just for the heck of it, to answer that survey online since you used to live in Washington, but you seem enthused about what's happening in your local place, and that's wonderful. And don't give up hope. Remember, only the Spirit can make it happen. And don't give up on the Spirit.
Okay, thank you. I'm with you on that, because there was, I mean, some people, even from that session, some people talked about things they were going to change about their own behavior in their parish. And so even so I just feel like even that's a little incremental sign of hope.
But that is, there's no question about it. Yeah. Keep us posted.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. So let's see, we've got Lydia. Lydia, you're next on the list. Lydia, you are still muted. I don't know why.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah, now we can.
Yeah. I found when I was asking people who had been very interested in church, they would be above my age group, and now they're saying, I've lost heart.
I've lost what?
I've lost heart. And they're afraid that things may
Heart.
not be sent, yes, that things may not be sent from the parish. And I thought I would ask, we haven't had our meetings yet. I would ask, can we who have come see what's going into the bishop, to our bishop? That was one thing. Another thing is, I'm conscious that in this parish there's a few ex-priests. One is married, one has been an Anglican vicar, and the other one I don't know. And I feel I should somehow approach them and ask them to come, but I feel I need a lot of courage to do that.
But you know,
they're the voices we need to hear.
Definitely, and to invite, you know, again, is simply that, an invitation. And if they want to come, they will come. But if they choose not to, but certainly, you know, articulate the invitation. They might surprise you. They might be very moved by the invitation. And we're hoping too that the Synod will have ecumenical implications as well, because other Christian churches are looking at the Synod to see how it's working. And there's cross conversation going on between the various denominations. And one other thing that I wanted to add after Deb finished speaking was that the final mass will be, or the final assembly will be in 2023. That will not be the end of the Synod. The Synod will then really get into gear once the report is in and the Synod of Bishops has a chance to review the final report and make their recommendations, etc., and hopefully hear voices other than their own at that Synod. But trust me, October 2023 is not the end of the Synod. It's the beginning.
It's the beginning. Thank you very much. And thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lydia. Mary Ellen, you have a question. You'll need to unmute, Mary Ellen.
I had participated in a parish that to me exemplified church at a very concrete level. It's Our Lady Queen of Peace in Arlington, Virginia, and I did put a reference to the bulletin from this week on the chat. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble with my computer, so I couldn't put the website address in, although Deb has it. And as we were talking today, I think what we had was very similar when I was there to a synodal process that we were dealing with the sex abuse crisis in the church. And this is a church that has a lot of young people. I mean, we have a full-time youth and a young adult minister as part of the headed as part of the parish. I'm now in a diocese where I can't find anything about the Synod except that They will use various methods and various means to discover. I mean, it's all this language that doesn't really say anything. And each pastor can decide what they want to do. I mean, it doesn't sound anything like a synodal process, but my reference to Queen of Peace is that experience of church gives me hope. I mean, there are average about 99 ministries, most of them that are started by the lay people. But the synodal experience, and the reason I reference the bulletin, it's got their synodal experience is on this week's bulletin, what they're doing and how they're going about it. And I just thought that might be helpful for some folks to have.
And you just prompted me, going back to Joe's question for a second. In February, toward the end of February, the middle, the LA Congress has a whole youth day. One whole day is devoted to youth. And I have to go on the website to see if in fact the Synod is listed as something that is going to be discussed. Because you've got over 10,000 young people that attend this youth day at the LA Congress every year. And that would certainly be a way to boost the interest in young people. But as far as Mary Ellen, your parish, that the good thing is that there are many parishes in the country who are similar to your initial parish, with all these many, many ministries that were begun by lay people. And I'm sorry that your current one doesn't match up to that. That's unfortunate. But I give thanks for the many parishes that do.
Thank you. That's the only comment I wanted to make, issue that I wanted to.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. So one more question with Rita. Would you go ahead?
Oh, hi, thanks. It's good to see you, Maureen. Thanks again. Of course, Deb and Russ. And all these suggestions on the chat are just wonderful. I'm taking screenshots. So I have two questions. Well, one's more a suggestion that I want like feedback on. So I teach confirmation. I'm very fortunate. And we have a really open-minded director of religious ed. We do a retreat. And after listening to people tonight, and also, and I had the idea that we could use a tailored questionnaire. One of the members of our church council specializes in youth development, and she's written a tailored questionnaire for like teenagers to give their input on the synod. I think it needs a little bit more tailoring to the kids really know what they don't really, it doesn't tell them what a synod is. But that's just an idea. I haven't gotten approval for that yet, but if anyone else teaches confirmation, they want to hear, they want to know. Yeah. They want to know the history, and having them, they're so used to like answering questions, for homework that if you give them the right background, they can put their hearts into it. The structure basically of the questionnaire was built on relationships. Like the same way you develop your friendships, we would like you to start thinking about what do you want and you have things you want from your friends. Well, what do you want from your church? That's sort of the setup.
I like it.
Yeah, so thank you. So the history, we also teach church history. And one of the things we talk about is the councils, like the Council of Nicaea, et cetera. But I know from my reading that there are also gatherings called synods. And I never really, like in the 5th and 4th century, I've never really been able to distinguish exactly what was the difference between a council and a synod back then. But listening to what you said tonight, it seems like there's no connection back to a synod of like the 4th or 5th century. Is that accurate?
Not really, because a synod is a gathering of bishops. All right. And it's so you could have your synod, you have your regional synod. So for example, you could have a gathering of American bishops, or you could have a gathering of Italian bishops who come together. But there were synods in our church history, and there were also ecumenical councils in our church history. And that's where that's where the world church is represented, whereas synods generally are local.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, they like to know that they're connected back to an
Right.
ancient
Exactly.
sources. Okay,
Exactly.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for teaching.
Thanks, everyone. Just so you know, Sister Maureen, I did look at what the Religious Ed Congress is doing in terms of workshops for young people, and there is at least one thing on the Synod. So they are doing some kind of a
Good.
workshop for the
Good,
young
good,
people.
good.
Probably not enough, but it's
Yeah.
good that it's up on the list. So
Mhm.
anyway, so I'm going to turn this over to Russ, who's going
Okay.
to say goodnight and do our closing prayer.
And my thanks to all of you who came tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Deb, and thank you, Sister Maureen.
You're very
Just
welcome.
another wonderful session. So thank
Thank
you.
you.